is proudly sponsored by Glenmark Pharmaceuticals and hosted by the KZNDHC. And I'd like to thank everyone involved for putting this meeting together, especially our two speakers who I'll introduce shortly. Before we proceed, I'd just like to call upon Hein to say a few words on behalf of Glenmark. Yeah, okay. Sorry, it's Hansi.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. We're starting to become regulars on this platform and we really enjoy it. I just quickly want to share my screen with you and just also play. Is my sound not working? Sorry. So I just quickly want to share my screen and then also do a quick, just a video for you guys that I haven't done before. This is specifically for Rhinitis and just showing the mode of action to you guys. So just spare me with 2-3 minutes, please.
Indicated symptoms of seasonal allergic rhinitis in adolescents and adults. Ryaltris is a fixed-dose combination of the antihistamine olopatadine hydrochloride and the corticosteroid mometasone furoate. Due to this unique combination of Ryaltris, your patients will experience immediate as well as sustained relief from the symptoms of allergic rhinitis with minimal side effects. The pathogenesis of allergic rhinitis involves both early and late-stage immunoglobulin E, or IgE-mediated responses to allergens, where numerous inflammatory cells are activated. Ryaltris is administered intranasally. The active components mometasone and olopatadine act at both stages, providing a holistic approach to disease management. Olopatadine, the antihistaminic component of Ryaltris, blocks the histamine receptors within minutes to ameliorate the effects of early-phase allergic responses that manifest as rhinorrhea, sneezing and itching, watering eyes. Olopatadine's local action on nasal mucosa offers greater efficiency and a better safety profile compared to oral antihistamines. Mometasone reduces production of leukotrienes, prostaglandins, and bradykinin by blocking phospholipase A and has an inhibitory effect on interleukin-4. This early phase is followed by late phase response, characterized by the influx and activation of T cells, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, and monocytes in the nasal submucosa and epithelium. Studies suggest that mometasone reduces the release of these inflammatory mediators in nasal mucosa. Thus preventing the symptoms of late phase response, such as persistent nasal congestion and wheeze. The effectiveness and tolerability of Ryaltris has been studied in several clinical trials, involving more than 4,000 patients with proven superiority over currently available first-line therapies. With a simple recommended dose of 2 sprays in each nostril twice daily, your patients on Ryaltris may experience rapid onset of action as early as 15 minutes, long duration of action, significant improvement in nasal symptoms versus monotherapy, significant improvement in ocular symptoms, significant improvement in overall quality of life.
Thank you very much. And it's also, I just want to give an update on Rhinitis and where we're standing. So currently the PR states that it's for seasonal allergic rhinitis. We are just waiting for SAPRA to update the PI where we will be indicated for perennial allergic rhinitis. So you can use it long term as well. We've got studies up to 52 weeks that doesn't only show safety, but also effectiveness over the 52-week period as well. Current SCP 317 Rand. Cost to patient around 350 Rand. This product is doing really well and it's cementing both Glenmark and Rhinitis as a key player in the allergic rhinitis and respiratory market. With that being said, I just quickly want to introduce to you in the next week and a half, we are bringing a first-to-market generic for Forvent named Tiore. So the representatives will come out as soon as the marketing material is ready, and also when the product is in the pharmacy, but the stock is in South Africa at wholesale, busy being moved around. So for those patients where you would use tiotropium, Tiore is a good option. It's currently 25% less cost saving for the patient at the end of the day. And we have in each single box that we sell, we have the device, the Zephyr, with the capsules. So the patients will get a new device with every time they go and fetch it, unlike Forvent, where most of the patients are just getting the caps and having to reuse the device. So just so that you know, Tiore is the first to market generic for Forvent and Spiriva, coming in the next week and after 2 weeks. As always, if there's anything, an opportunity that you think we can get involved with, if there's a query on Rhinitis or any other portfolios, please don't hesitate to contact me. There's my email address at the bottom. There is my cell phone number. I'm always willing to help and listen to any queries, concerns, or even positive feedback. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I really believe that you guys are going to find value in Dr. Berry and Prof. Chetty's talks tonight. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hansi, and thanks for the detail on those products. We're looking forward to it as well. Colleagues, it's my pleasure this evening. Before I start, I'd just like to inform everyone to please adhere to the house rules. Please, if you can switch your microphones off and the videos off as well. If there's any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat box, and we will address that at the end of the presentation. The two talks are CPD accredited, and one of them you will get an ethics point for it as well. The register will be at the end of the second talk. Colleagues, it's my pleasure to welcome our esteemed speaker this evening, Dr. Peter Berry. I must admit, when I was going through his CV, I was quite impressed. You know, it looks like we're dealing with someone out of a Hollywood movie here. Dr. Berry has had previous experience in the military service, and he was part of the parachute battalion. And his interests are quite wide and varied, and it includes kite surfing, canoeing, paragliding, and scuba diving. He has worked previously at Gwelezan Hospital and was head of Department of ENT at King Edward Hospital as well. He is currently in private practice at Kingsway Hospital and has been there for over 20 years. Dr. Berry, thank you very much for joining us this evening and for giving us this talk. Okay, we can just get you to screen share. Let's see.
Hi, can you see me? If somebody can just tell me if I'm on the screen or if the slide is on the screen.
Yeah, we can see the slide, Dr. Berry.
And you can hear me okay as well?
Loud and clear, thanks.
Okay, all right, 100%. Yeah, just to start off, I was never the head of the department of ENT at King Edward Hospital. Okay. I don't know where that slipped in. I was a consultant there for a few years, but never the head of the department. So the purpose of this presentation pretty much is to look at the latest data and treatment of allergic rhinitis. The article where most of my information comes from was recently published in the Journal of Allergy in September 2020. And in this article, they looked at all the published papers on the treatment of allergic rhinitis over the last plus minus 10 years. I think there was over 300 different articles, but it was actually a very good summary. So for anyone who's interested in that, it's in the volume 75, issue 12 of Journal of Allergy. So to start off, I'm going to quickly just refresh our memory on allergic rhinitis and just a few interesting facts that came out of this review article. As we all know, it's a disease of the upper airway with symptoms of nasal obstruction, rhinorrhea, sneezing, and nasal itching. But it's not just that. It leads to lack of production at work. Actually, articles on school performance showed up to a 20% improvement in school performance when kids were treated properly. It leads to lethargy, depression, headaches. So it's significantly more than just something to sneeze at. And it's extremely common. Up to 10 to 40% of the population as it is. 30 years ago, it was between 4 to 7% of the population. So it is a disease that's increasing all the time. It's still divided into the seasonal and perennial. Seasonal normally caused by the outdoor allergens such as the grass and the tree pollens, etc. And perennial mostly from indoor allergens such as dust mite. An interesting study that was done in South Africa that came up in this article showed that children in rural areas compared to urban areas where they were exposed to farm animals during their months of pregnancy had significantly less allergic diseases compared to in urban areas. We also know that an increase in air pollutants is associated with an increased incidence of allergic respiratory diseases. And probably one of the reasons why this disease is increasing all the time. It is clear out of this review article that patients with asthma are the ones that's significantly more difficult to treat and control. So if you see a patient with asthma and allergic rhinitis, that will be the ones where you have to really put in an effort to control their disease. As far as the treatment goes, everything starts with patient education. The poor compliance in the treatment of allergic rhinitis is by far the main reason for treatment failure. So it is extremely important for us as doctors to explain to the patient exactly that his steroid nasal spray is a preventative treatment and not a symptomatic treatment. So if he sprays his nose, he's not going to feel better. He's probably going to feel better 6 weeks from now. And that the antihistamines will give symptomatic improvement fairly quickly, etc., so that we can get proper compliance. To help with compliance is now an allergy mobile app that showed that up to 20% better improvement in symptom scorecards in patients that use this app to remind them when to use their treatment, etc. When we go to the specific treatment, I'm first going to start with the immunotherapy. Now, the subcutaneous immunotherapy has a significantly better compliance and efficacy than the sublingual immunotherapy. It is probably obvious because I get the subcutaneous injections once a month compared to daily sublingual drops under the tongue in the mornings. But unfortunately, it can sometimes cause severe side effects, severe asthma, and quite a few cases of death as well. And because of that, I think a lot of people treating allergy is shying away from the subcutaneous immunotherapy. The sublingual immunotherapy treatment protocols are still very long, a minimum of 3 years in most of the studies. Some indicate even up to 8 years. I would say average of probably 5 years of doing it every day with drops under the tongue. And unfortunately, it's still not effective to lead to long-term solutions. So patients will do their sublingual immunotherapy for 3 years, will be okay for probably around about 2 years, and then their symptoms will start coming back again. So the specific immunotherapy still have a long way to go, and there's a lot of room for improvement still. One of the new kids on the block that was talked a lot in this article is the biologics, which is a buzzword in many parts of medicine at the moment, as you well know, in cancer treatment, etc. In the treatment of asthma and allergic rhinitis, they have the two main classes, the anti-IgE and the anti-interleukin-5. And the early indications are that they will help in uncontrolled persistent asthma and chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps. It's still not available in South Africa, but apparently the launch will be imminent. What it's going to cost you, I don't know. in the articles, they complain about the cost in European countries, so I can believe it will probably quite costly in this country as well. It doesn't look like it's going to be monotherapy, and that it will be still used in conjunction with other standard treatments that we have already. What was interesting was that they have a biologic called FALD1, which you can add into your cat's food, which will reduce the allergen in the cat's saliva, and then reducing the symptoms in somebody that's allergic to their cats and doesn't want to get rid of their cats. And I actually found that it's very difficult to get rid of pets. I had a patient, a school-going child, that had severe allergic rhinitis to his dog. And I said to the parents, well, the option is get rid of the dog or, you know, go on your nasal spray as chronic medication. So I saw him 6 months later, and I asked him how he's doing, and he says, no, he's fine, except holidays. I said, what do you mean holidays? He says, no, they put him in boarding school. So they got rid of the child rather than getting rid of the pet. When we come to the pharmacotherapy, we have our 5 mainstay of treatments, the nasal and oral steroids, which is very good for the blockers, the patients with congestion, but it treats all symptoms very well. The antihistamines, which is very good for the runners, the sneezy, the runny nose, the itchiness, the leukotriene receptor antagonists, the mast cell membrane stabilizers, and the oral over-the-counter decongestants. Let's start with the antihistamines. They've been around for long. The main problem in the beginning was sedation, especially in the early generation of antihistamines. And the reason I'm still talking about sedation is I still often see kids that's on, say, Allergics that sedates them heavy. And even though they take the medication at night, it still has a major effect on their school performance during the day. So it's still a problem, and therefore one should give them a non-sedating antihistamine. The other problem with the antihistamines is that it's got minimal effect on the congestion part of allergic rhinitis, which probably is the biggest cause or worry for patients with allergic rhinitis. The oral antihistamines are still not safe in the first trimester of pregnancy. The nasal sprays are safe for that, for pregnancy. But as a treatment on its own, it probably is not the choice. It might play a role in seasonal allergic rhinitis. The leukotriene receptor antagonist is effective in treatment of asthma and made a big difference there, but unfortunately there's no evidence of significant improvement in allergic rhinitis, and therefore it's still not part of our arsenal in treating allergic rhinitis. The mast cell membrane stabilizers are effective, but the big problem was compliance. You have to use it 5 times per day or even more. And because of that, they've fallen by the side a bit. I remember before steroid nasal sprays came out, it was obviously our standard treatment, but unfortunately not the case anymore. The over-the-counter decongestants has one major problem, and that is with the rebound edema. So if the patients will use it for too long, they will start getting rebound edema. And so for that reason, it cannot be used for long periods at a time. And if patients do that and they get to the stage what we call rhinitis medicamentosa, it's a major problem to get them off the over-the-counter decongestant. The typical patient is a patient with a spray in his pocket, spray in his car, at work, at home, because the time that it's effective becomes less and less and less. And if they abuse the over-the-counter decongestants for long periods of time, they can develop septal perforations and even collapse of the support of the nose. So obviously it's not a long-term treatment, but can be used in short term. The oral glucocorticoids, obviously that works very well, and it's very effective in breakthrough asthma and allergic rhinitis, but not for long-term treatment because of all the significant side effects that we all know about. And the mainstay or standard part of our treatment for allergic rhinitis, the nasal steroid sprays. Now, a lot has been said about the safety of them. I know some of them are registered from 2 years on, some of them are registered from 12 years on. I can honestly tell you they're all safe. The minimum that's available systemically is negligible. They're also all effective. There's many on the market. They work. Their success rate is from 84% to into the 90%. Some a little bit better than others, but in general, they're all effective. Some will burn a bit, and some is registered for ocular symptoms, and so the list can go on and on. But I can tell you now, if used religiously, they're all effective. The big problem is the compliance. You know, most of the patients doesn't enjoy the fact that they have to use a spray once or twice every day religiously for years. And for that reason, studies clearly shows that more than 40% of patients won't be compliant with their steroid nasal sprays. So the new kid on the block, and it's not so new anymore, and there's a few of them worldwide available already, is where the antihistamine and the steroid nasal sprays are combined in one spray. And there's 2 studies that was looking at comparing this to just a steroid nasal spray. In one article, and the other one I compared it to a steroid nasal spray and a systemic antihistamine. And it was actually quite a revelation when it came out that the improvement was 30% better compared to a steroid nasal spray on its own or a systemic antihistamine, you know. And the question is, how is that possible? You know, it's the same things, it's just in one spray. And it comes down to one thing and one thing only. Because of the antihistamine effect, there is symptomatic improvement within minutes. But because of the steroid spray, there is long-term preventative treatment. And because of that immediately improvement, the patients enjoy the spray and they're compliant. So everything comes down to compliance. And because there's better compliance, there's better results. In fact, they actually mentioned there that we should talk to patients not to use it every 4 or 5 hours, because that's what started happening with some of the patients, because they can see the improvement within minutes because of the antihistamine effect. So at this stage, it looks like it's a very good weapon in our arsenal for the treatment of allergic rhinitis. It is totally safe because we know that the antihistamines and the steroid nasal sprays are totally safe. And if it gives us better control, you know, that will be great. So I don't know how it's going to work. Are we going to ask questions now or at the end of both the talks? I'm not sure.
We'll do it at the end. Dr.
Okay,
Berry.
no problem. All right. So I will come out then so that the next speaker can.
No, if you're done, we can do the questions for this presentation now.
Okay, yeah, that was the end of the talk, so we can do that now. Yeah. Okay.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Dr. Berry. Interesting last slide that, and it is true.
Yeah, it's the times we are living in. You know, if you sneeze because of the COVID-19 virus, it can lead to a disaster, I suppose. So we should not underestimate the sneezing. Yeah.
Okay. I just got a question with regards to the antihistamine that's in Rhinitis. We know the systemic absorption is probably very little. Is there any sedation associated with that?
Not at all, because of that very minimal systemic absorption, you know. So as I've mentioned, it's totally safe. There's no side effects from sedation or anything like that. It's really totally safe. You know, we've had antihistamine sprays for years, and there was never any problems with them as well. You know, so it's not like it's something new. What's new is that they took two very good treatments together in one spray.
Excellent. Okay, we've got some good questions in the chat. The first one: headaches, especially in children, as a symptom of allergic rhinitis, is not commonly recognized. Do you concur?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the first thing I think when we deal with children with allergic rhinitis, it's something that really only starts at around about 4 years. You know, it's not something that we see in the young kids. In the young kids, we see it's probably more food allergies that plays a role there. But because it starts at a young age, I think the children also just sort of grow up with this and they don't complain. They have headaches, but they just sort of live with it. And we see patients and they have allergic rhinitis, but they don't even mention headaches. To be honest with you, adults present with headaches. That's the first complaint. Children, the mom is complaining because of a snotty nose. You know? So I think that obviously we know that the congestion will lead to headaches, and that if we probably go and ask them properly, we'll find out that a lot of them do complain about headaches, but they just sort of don't mention it.
I think also the common thing to look out for is that infamous nasal salute that some of them come in with.
Yeah, yeah, the allergic salute, yeah, and the allergic shyness as well. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. Okay, the next question. First generation antihistamines, including celestibine, that's been discontinued, but probably with the other steroids, should not be used, especially in children in treating allergic rhinitis. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think one should always try and stay away from systemic steroids as far as possible, but there's still a role to play for it. You know, if I see a patient that's totally out of control, they usually are the asthmatic patients, so their chest is out of control. I actually don't have a problem giving them 5 days of a systemic steroid, just get some control of the disease and then carry on with the safe medications. You know. But as far as possible, stay away from it.
Okay. And do you have any experience with the OptiNose nasal steroid delivery system?
The what? No.
Okay, it's probably not available here. Okay. The next question. The combination of antihistamine and corticosteroid, or the corticosteroid only, would also reduce the need for decongestants. Would it also reduce the need for decongestants if we use both?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the decongestants will play a very small role in most of these things. You know, I don't mind if somebody uses an over-the-counter decongestant for a week or 2 when they have lost a bit of control of the allergy, because we know that the steroid nasal spray is preventative, so it doesn't give immediate improvement, but not long-term, you know. But the antihistamines effect on the congestion of the nose is not a big effect. In fact, some of them have nearly no effect. So we got to rely on the steroids for that part of the treatment of allergic rhinitis. As I've mentioned, the antihistamine does help with a symptomatic improvement within minutes, and then because of that, better compliance with the steroid nasal spray, better decongestion, and results in the long term.
Thanks. And I'm sure once that's controlled, we will see less of the otitis media in kids as well.
Oh, it goes hand in hand, yeah. You know.
There's another question. We know the association of rhinitis and asthma. Are there any studies on the association between rhinitis and eczema for all 3?
I haven't seen any in this article because it was pretty much a review of treatment of allergic rhinitis and all the latest modalities in treating it. But I can tell with asthma and allergic rhinitis, it varies between 30% to 70% of patients. In eczema, obviously there's a link. How the percentage I can't tell you, but I mean it's part of the whole atopic picture: asthma, allergic rhinitis, and eczema.
Okay, thanks. In COVID rhinitis in children, what would you commence with? What would be your stepwise approach in treating them?
Okay, COVID rhinitis in children obviously is not allergic rhinitis. It's a cold, and you know, I treat it purely symptomatic. I will use a over-the-counter decongestant for a short period. If it doesn't dry up, I can use something like betnosol drops. If that still doesn't work, you know, I might use a short course of aspirine and sometimes an antihistamine C. But I must say, I haven't found any COVID-19 kiddies that runny nose persists for too long.
Thanks. And if there's a nasal polyp, when will you consider a polypectomy?
Only when there's obstructive symptoms. You know, a lot of early nasal polyps can be treated medically. If the patients stick to their medication, the steroid nasal spray, when the polyp is small, they will be okay. They will stay like that. But when it starts causing obstruction of sinus and then followed with secondary bacterial infections, you'll reach a stage where you have to do something, you know.
Thanks. The orpatadine, you know, contained in Rhinitis, it does come in eye drop as well. Is there any reduction in ocular symptoms from using Rhinitis?
Absolutely, yeah. We know that the tear duct opens in the inferior meatus in the nose. So when we spray the spray in the nose, it will actually go up the tear duct and actually over the eyes. And that's why there are even some steroid nasal sprays that's registered for ocular symptoms, allergic conjunctivitis even. So yeah, it definitely will make a difference there.
Excellent. If there's any further questions, you can please put it in the chat box. We can ask Dr. Berry. Okay. I think everyone is quite satisfied with all the questions and answers. Okay.
All right, no problem. Okay,
thank you very much, Dr. Berry.
I'll just get out of the screen then so you can carry on with the prof.
No problem. Yeah. Okay. Adjust my slide. Okay, colleagues, that was an excellent talk by Dr. Peter Berry, and he is based at Kingsway Hospital. His details, I'm sure, will be circulated by KZNDHC. Thank you very much once again, and thanks to Glenmark as well. Colleagues, our next speaker is Prof. Morgan Chetty. When I asked my staff to print out his CV, they actually said, you know, Doc, we need 2 reams more of paper. I think most of us know Prof for many years, but suffice to say, he is the chairman of KZNDHC. He has written many books on managed care, and he's a respected speaker at a host of national and international conferences. He has received many awards for leadership in healthcare. His expertise, clinical experience, and active involvement in primary healthcare has helped each and every one of us in some way over the years. Currently, he is actively involved in the NHI process, and more so with vaccinations. Hence, the topic today is on emergency use authorization of COVID-19 vaccines. Prof, thank you very much for preparing this talk for us tonight. Let me just see if he's unmuted. Prof, if you can just check your microphone. Just give us a minute. We'll just try and get Prof to get the presentation going.
Peter?
Hi, Prof. You can start here.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Balu. Sometimes when I hear these introductions, I'm not sure who you're talking about. but I'm here at the moment. Let me thank Glenmark, because this is one of a series of sponsorships that they've given us. And as I said previously, we want to thank them because the objective of these series were to take us to the AGM and our conference. So this was like almost like an hors d'oeuvre to the conference itself. So yeah, I really thank them. I think they're doing a very good job. We appreciate the fact that they've stayed the journey with us, and they will stay the journey till the conference. Now, today I'm going to talk about something that's very controversial. It's controversial not just in South Africa, it's controversial globally. If you look at the global chatter at the moment, you would see that one of the main concerns globally of achieving herd immunity is that it can be between 10 and 20% in some countries where there's vaccine hesitancy. And I think there are a number of factors for it. We will be doing this talk tonight, and then we'll be rolling into Africa on the 30th of September on a similar topic about unpacking vaccine hesitancy in Africa, with people from different parts of Africa having to share with us their peculiar sort of reasons or stories why vaccine hesitancy is so rife at the moment, if that's the right word to use. And it can vary for a number of different reasons. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, just look at what are some of the issues before we go into the three parts of this talk that I'm going to do with you. And we find that at a macro level, vaccine hesitancy seems to be a distortion between the trust in science and vaccine confidence. And this amazes me because the science is really packed with evidence, and yet we find that we're having resistance. And this resistance can come from a number of different areas. I'll tell you about in a few minutes. At one end, you know, it's not a binary decision whether you have this or that. It's a continuum. At one end, there are those who accept the vaccine and have no doubts. At the other end are those who completely refuse the vaccine. And then there is a heterogeneous group in the middle of this continuum. So if you look at challenges, you can't have a set of 10 methods in which you would manage vaccine hesitancy. You're going to look at the challenges, and these challenges can be regional, can be global, can be based on a number of factors. It can be due to literacy, it can be due to culture, it can be to belief systems, it can be due to the age of a patient. In South Africa, we at the moment are really concerned that we've opened up over the 18s, and we're not seeing the influx of people coming in. I'm not sure whether the youth in this country over the age of 18 feel that they wear bulletproof vests and they don't need the vaccine, but that's what we're experiencing, which is quite a difficult thing to understand. The social class and gender. Gender is a little bit of a issue that can be regional. We notice that in South Africa, there's a bigger uptake, greater compliance to the vaccine program from females than males. In other parts of Africa, they found that the females were more hesitant and males were more positive with the vaccine. And there we have ethnicity. So there's a number of different issues involved with vaccines. So I'm going to concentrate tonight on three issues. And these are the issues very often used by the anti-vaxxers as a founding argument to dissuade people from using vaccines. I want to make this very clear. People can have their own opinions whether they take a vaccine or not take the vaccine. I think anti-vaxxers are allowed to have the democratic right. I am just doing what I believe is the right thing to do in this country, and is to get as many people vaccinated if we want to get herd immunity and we want to save this country and save the entire globe. So I'm going to focus on a few areas. One is this whole concept of emergency use authorization. Is it just something that's pulled out of a hat, or is it has a science behind it? And what are the ethical constraints? And then what are the ethical conundrums that we face with emergency use authorization? Some are not so easy to understand, and some are fairly easy to understand. And then the latest thing that's come up for discussion, it's come up in South Africa, it's being looked at by the Interministerial Committee, by the advisors to the Minister of Health, this whole issue of vaccine mandates. And we know that America at the moment identified 80,000 people in certain job categories that they now are going to insist that they have the vaccines done. I just saw a WhatsApp message going around. I can't vouch whether this is fake or not, but I saw something saying that to go into the Galleria Mall in Isipingo on the South Coast, there's a big sign out there saying no one is allowed into the Galleria Mall if you don't have evidence that you've been vaccinated. So the question that we're going to ask is the legal muster around emergency use authorization and vaccine mandates, and how are we going to handle this, and will this become a reality? So let's start by just looking at what is an emergency use authorization. It is a mechanism to facilitate the availability and the use of any countermeasure, including vaccines, during public health emergencies, such as the current COVID-19 pandemic. I think it'll be appropriate for me to actually define what a public health emergency is and say, why are we all sort of racing ahead, wanting to get these vaccines done? A public health emergency of international concern is a formal declaration by the WHO of an extraordinary event which is determined to constitute a public health risk to other states or other countries through international spread, and to potentially require a coordinated international response. So when we talk about public health emergency, I mean that this is a really serious threat to the existence of virtually the entire world. So we can talk about a lot of different regulatory bodies, but let's talk about the ones that make a lot of decisions globally. The FDA, the European Medicine Agency, the EMA, and the WHO, each have procedures that allow for emergency use of medicines. So this is not something that's done just by SAPRA. SAPRA does it in South Africa, but this is done on a global basis. The FDA particularly is globally respected for its scientific standards of vaccine safety, effectiveness, and quality. The point I'm making here is that this entire decision on EUAs is science-based and based by bodies that are credible. It's not done just for the sake of us having to take it by anecdotal kind of evidence. So the FDA and other regulatory bodies, they provide scientific and regulatory advice to vaccine developers and undertakes a rigorous evaluation of the scientific information through all phases of clinical trials, which continue after the vaccine has been approved. So they have standards set up, and this is set and discussed long before the vaccine is developed. But what are the standards they want? The rigorous evaluation of these scientific data, and this does not stop after the vaccine has been approved by the FDA, but it continues further, and it's also to monitor and evaluate other side effects or untoward effects that may occur after the regulated use of the vaccine. So even here, precaution is taken to say, we're not going to close the shop because the vaccine is now available to be sold, but we need to watch and see if this is going to have any effect on the people. So that's the kind of confidence that you and I have to give our patients, because right now, one of the theories that we work on is that the medical practitioner or medical professionals, not just the doctor, who come into daily contact with the patient, we have the greatest opportunity to spend time with each of our patients and convince them why a vaccine is safe and why they should take it. And they have greater kind of propensity to listen to us than they will listen to a media document. And I'm not 100% sure in my own mind what role the sports stars and the film stars are playing with this. I think a simple healthcare professional sitting across the table from his patient can do as much as all these big stars that are now being used. So my views may be a little bit out of sync with what's going on, but I have a lot of faith in healthcare professionals having the patients having trust in them, and they having the opportunity to change the mindset of patients. The FDA recognizes the gravity of a public health emergency and the importance of facilitating availability as soon as possible of vaccines to prevent COVID-19. Vaccines that the public will trust and have confidence in receiving. Now, as you know, at one stage when we started 18 months ago, there were talks of about 200 vaccine candidates or slightly less. We now come to just about 12 vaccine candidates, and we actually see in South Africa, we are concentrating on just 3 vaccine candidates, on vaccines. So you can see the fact that as time has built up, we have to choose vaccines where the public will have trust in and have confidence in receiving it. So under an emergency use authorization, the FDA, and this is very important to listen to, may allow the use of unapproved medical products or unapproved use of approved medical products in emergency to diagnose, treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions when certain statutory criteria have been met, including the fact that there are no adequate, approved, and available alternative. So it's a mouthful, but what it says is that they take into account a number of different issues before they allow this. It is based on statutory criteria, not just one scientist getting up and drawing 10 guidelines. And it occurs when there is no other adequate, appropriate, and available alternative. So it's something that's very important because it's probably the only thing available for us to use in the event of a public health emergency. So take into consideration the input from the FDA. People who manufacture these products decide whether and when to submit an EUA request to the FDA. The reason for that, the details, the explicitness, the science that's required for you to do an EUA request is forbidding. And therefore, a company that wants to go and apply for an EUA must have these scientific criteria strongly in their dossier that they submit to the FDA. So once this dossier is submitted, the FDA will evaluate the EUA request and determine if the relevant statutory criteria are met, take into account the totality of the scientific evidence of a vaccine that is available to the FDA. The point that I'm making to you is that every single line emphasizes the science behind the decision to apply, the science behind the criteria used, and the science based on whether a company will be brave enough to put its dossier before the FDA for approval, because if that dossier has been removed, it will take a long time before they can reapply for an EUA. So the same thing goes with the European Medical Association. They also allow for approval of products based on limited data in an emergency situation. So let's look at what kind of emergency information that will be needed. If I use if I use the WHO's emergency use assessment listing, it's called UAL procedures. They allow for the procurement and the use of an unapproved product in an emergency context based on 3 review components. So this is very simple, but these review components, when we read through it, are very, very onerous for anybody to use, to want to apply for emergency use authorization. The review of a technical documentation relating to safety and performance. They would like to see all the analytic data and the clinical evidence of the stability of this data. Is this data stable data? Is it real data? Is it valid data that they are providing, and how much of data are they being presented with? So it's not like they would take a trial done on 25 people and say 20 of the 25 responded, and therefore this is successful. It's a huge concern, and each one of them has their limitations in terms of what the database should be. Then there's a review of the documentation relating to the manufacture of the product and the manufacturer's quality management system. So now we're not talking just about the product, we're talking about what is the documentation relating to the way the product is manufactured. And there is a dossier that must be accompanied, which is called the quality management system. And that is taken in conjunction with the technical documentation that is being provided. Then there is an independent laboratory evaluation coordinated by the WHO of the product's performance and operational characteristics. So it's not just done internally by the WHO. They would appoint an externally world-approved scientific body to do an independent review. So the point, and to this point, is we notice that this is quite a laborious, if I use that word, and very well documented. It has to be scientifically substantiated before one decides that my product is safe enough to be used, without it going to the full evaluation. And the reason why it's being stopped at a certain point, and I'll tell you which point, is because we have a world crisis and we need to enter this crisis as soon as possible to attenuate it. So, are COVID-19 vaccines rigorously tested? The reason I put this up, because one of the reasons given by the anti-vaccine group is that this vaccine was developed in a very short time. And the reason why this vaccine was developed in a very short time is A, because in a very short time, we had millions of people around the world, not just in Wuhan and China, that were getting infected. We had thousands and thousands of people being admitted to hospitals, and we had thousands and thousands of deaths. So there was a huge cohort globally available to enter clinical trials. Unlike if you were doing a trial on a medicine like hypertension or diabetes, you don't have millions of them in any one point in time, but you have cohorts in different places that can add up to a lot over a long period of time. So suddenly we have the propensity to gather a lot of people very quickly to do a trial. The second reason why the trials were done so quickly is that because it was a global crisis of equal distance, because this virus said to the globe, it doesn't discriminate, doesn't matter where you come from. All the big superpowers put billions and billions and billions of dollars into this vaccine development. Unlike if you did it for diabetes or something, you get a pharma company or a few sponsors, but you won't get big superpowers putting money into this. And the other thing that allowed for these vaccines to be developed in such a short time is that we have the advantage of technology. In the years gone by, we didn't have the technology to quickly assess, to quickly develop, and to separate molecules, to separate the vaccine from the cells. And we suddenly find ourselves with lots of people, with lots of money, and with the fact that we have technology on our side. This is the core reason why this trial was shortened compared to other trials like we get in medicines used in NCDs, etc. So it wasn't done to shortcut the process and to remove the science behind it, just to have this sold to make a lot of money. So yes, the vaccines were very vigorously tested. So let me quickly go through what happens. Clinical trials are evaluating investigational COVID-19 vaccines in tens of thousands of study participants to generate scientific data and other information needed by the FDA to determine safety and effectiveness. Maybe at a smaller scale, the same kind of work is being done with the development of other products that we use. So in the phase 1 trials, vaccines are given to a small number of generally healthy people to assess its safety at different increasing doses and to gain early information about how well the vaccine works to induce an immune response in people. So this will be a typical thing that you'll get in all phase 1 trials, and the vaccines for COVID had to go through this process as well. They then enter the phase 2 trials. In the absence of safety concerns from phase 1 studies, phase 2 studies include more people where various doses are tested on hundreds of people with typically varying health statuses or from different demographic groups in a randomized controlled studies. This is exactly what happens with other phase 2 trials for other drugs that we use, not just for this vaccine, even for other vaccines. These studies provide additional safety information on common short-term side effects and risks, examine the relationship between the dose administered and the immune response, and may provide additional information on the effectiveness of the vaccine. Now, those of you who do clinical trials will know these are the criteria, and these are the points, endpoints in the phase 2 of the trial that we will always be following and documenting. We don't go into the phase 3 trials, and the vaccines are generally administered to thousands of people in a randomized controlled studies, including broad demographic groups, and generates clinical information on effectiveness and additional safety data and additional information about immune response in people who receive the vaccine compared to those who receive a control such as a placebo. So in the phase 3 trials, we have two groups, one group that's getting the vaccine and the other group that's getting the placebo. Now, I just want to pause here and mention, when we decided to, with the emergency use authorization, when we decided to use the J&J vaccine in the Sizonka trial, we came into the phase 3 stage of it at the point at which an EUA was possible. But what we...
No, not me. I here will take, Carla will take, not me. I'm not taking anybody home. I can't do that.
I'm just waiting for this person to be offered.
I think you want to speak.
Can everyone just please mute their microphones? It's disturbing the presentation. Thanks.
So in the Sizonka trial, what we noticed is that they took the actual vaccine and they gave it to everybody and nobody got the placebo. Therefore, it was classified as a 3B trial in the sense that we didn't give some people the placebo and others the vaccine. This is what the anti-vaxxers have raised, that it is not correct to give people placebo and call it a vaccine. But in this trial, in the Sizonka trial, everybody got the vaccine. It got approved by the FDA as a 3B trial without anybody getting the placebo. So just to make that very clear, in this trial, none of us had the placebo. So vaccine manufacturers are undertaking a development process that includes tens of thousands of study participants to generate non-clinical, clinical manufacturing information needed for the FDA to determine whether the known and potential benefits outweighs the known and potential risks of the vaccine for prevention of COVID-19. So, the point I'm making again, it is the quality that's been looked at each level. It was for due purpose or due process. It had to look at whether the risks outweigh the benefits outweigh the risks. And this was the kind of criteria, and I'll show you the kind of scientific resources that I use to evaluate this. So when the phase 3 portion of a human clinical trial reaches a predetermined point that informs how well a vaccine prevents COVID-19, as discussed and agreed in advance by the FDA, an independent group called the Data Safety Monitoring Board will review the data and inform the manufacturer of the results. So these endpoints are set by the FDA. Of the 200 vaccines that we heard of initially as vaccine candidates, all of them could not come to this. It's just half a dozen that managed to come to this point in time to have themselves scrutinized by the Data Safety Monitoring Board. Based on the data and the interpretation of the data by this group, manufacturers decide whether and when to submit a EUA request to the FDA, taking into consideration the input of the FDA. So they have the endpoints, they know what the statutory criteria is, they fulfill all the processes and the trials as I discussed with you. Now they sit down and evaluate it with their scientific team that they are ready now to be scrutinized if this can be accepted by the FDA as an emergency use authorized vaccine. After the FDA receives the EUA request, a group of career scientists and physicians will then evaluate all the information included in the manufacturer's submission. So the manufacturer dossier must be thousands and thousands of pages. You have to have a scientific team of physicians and scientists that will sit and evaluate this to submit what we call a confidence assessment to the FDA. While the FDA evaluation is going on, a schedule of public meetings of vaccines and related biological products advisory committee, which is made up of external scientific and public health experts from throughout the country. These experts are screened for conflict of interest. They then will engage and discuss the safety and effectiveness data so that the public and the scientific committee will have a clear understanding of the data and the information that the FDA is evaluating to make a decision whether to authorize the COVID-19 vaccine emergency use. So this is now sitting in scientific committees. It's now gone into the public domain meetings with a biological products advisory committee. Following the advisory committee meeting, the FDA career professionals, staff, will consider the input of the advisory committee members and continue the evaluation of the submission to determine whether the available data and effectiveness and manufacturing data supports an emergency use authorization of a specific COVID-19 vaccine. So until this point, if I've made my point, the process is very tenuous. It's very science-based. It is based on a lot of data. It's based on a lot of scientific experts that sit around a table before an EUA is accepted. And I'm sure of the hundreds of applicants, you just get 2 or 3 that eventually succumb to this request to be launched, to be used before the biological consent is done. And as you know, with Pfizer, after the EUA was allowed, and so was it with J&J, and so was it with Moderna. You know, with Pfizer, just recently, the FDA, after they were thoroughly satisfied with the data after it was being used, did they give it the authority to be an approved vaccine. So who are these people that we call so-called career professionals that are called in to do it? Because that's been argued. This may be friends, they may be old buddies or retired people that are just called in to sign some document. These are career scientists. Their entire life and science is to do these evaluations, and physicians who are globally recognized. They're not just people that are, let's say if it's done in South Africa, that live in KZN or something. These are people that are found their recognition globally. They make decisions based on scientifically driven evaluation of data. Then there is continued monitoring. The FDA requires the vaccine manufacturers to include in their EUA request a plan for active follow-up for safety, including deaths, hospitalization, and other serious and clinically significant adverse events once individual receive the vaccine. Now, here again, we've heard of deaths, not necessarily from the vaccine, but at the time a vaccine was given. But here, the scientists use a thing called cause and effect, where you look at what was the cause of that particular death and find out if that death was in any way related to the vaccine. And we saw this with the thromboembolic functions, and we've seen it with a few females in the USA that had these thrombolytic thing, and then they found that these people also were taking birth control tablets and other things that could have caused this. And we see this also being discussed as people who had strokes following that. So what they do is they have a process called cause and effect run by scientists to see, was that directly affected by the vaccine, or was this another medical cause to it? But if it was definitely a related issue, then that will be brought to the attention of the FDA, and that vaccine will then be put on hold. So the information to the vaccine recipients about the benefits and risks of any vaccine that receives an EUA, what are these? Recipients of the vaccines under EUA are informed that the FDA has authorized the EUA of the vaccine. Known and potential benefits and risks, the extent to which benefits and risks are unknown. They have the option either to accept or refuse the vaccine, or any other, or they can accept any other alternative to the product. So this information is in all the packages in which the vials of vaccines are sent around. And when you use it, the vaccinating sites are supposed to, and they do, make copies of these package inserts on the vaccine itself. And we find that this information is contained in what is called the patient fact sheet, that the patient should know everything about the vaccine. And the patient, this is displayed where the vaccines are being administered so that the patient has access to it. And some patients are given to this when they do the online consent to have the vaccines done. So what are some of the ethical arguments for EUA during a public health crisis? Is it as simple, you get a vaccine because the scientists say it's good enough, or why do we need to look at the ethics here? And for me, it's a pleasure for me to do this little part with you, because the scientists here and the ethicist is the South African, Prof. Jerome Singh from Caprisa, who writes in the Public Health magazine journal. And he wrote the following lines, which I took out of it for you. And he wrote this at the time of the Ebola crisis. And he said, and Jerome argues that the lack of emergency use procedures in many countries can stymie time-sensitive efforts to contain public health threats. And this was particularly in Ebola, where a lot of people were not using the vaccine, and the vaccines in Ebola were not even in stage 3, but they had to be used because it was causing a major morbidity and mortality. and a lot of countries did not have any procedure in place to evaluate emergency use medicines. Singh continues that there is no effective if there is no effective alternative treatment, it is an ethical responsibility for authorities to provide access to experimental treatments. The regional communities, such as the African Union, should develop emergency framework that would facilitate access in emergency situations. And this line is extracted from the issues and the discussion around Ebola, which would be similar kind of argument and discussion and ethics if you were going to extract it and use it for the COVID vaccine. So even with limited treatment options, regulators must still take ethical considerations and weigh the risk of using products that have not yet been fully vetted. So when the outbreaks have high mortality rate, it will be necessary to accept greater risks in developing treatments. So sometimes if you look at the risk and you find that the benefit and risk kind of ratio is a bit dicey, but because of the great deal of morbidity and mortality, you may want to lean towards greater risks. And that's what happened in Ebola. And thank God for that, it worked for them. So risk can be mitigated through development of robust monitoring and evaluation components that will inform product development and licensure. Another ethical argument, time-sensitive access to unapproved experimental interventions should be permitted on humanitarian grounds when patients and communities are facing death or irreversible disease progression and no other efficacious diagnostic, preventative, or therapeutic option exists. So this is just a counter argument to the fact that sometimes you got to weigh and accept that risk will be more prominent than being safe. But in the long run, you want to save as many people as possible. So the global level rapid response governance framework for the employment of unapproved interventions in humanitarian context should be established as a matter of urgency. So it depends where in the world it is. And what we're finding at the moment, the Western world, with all its resources, are far ahead of Africa in terms of developing these unapproved interventions based on humanitarian context and grounds, because they have greater resources in order to put this into effect very rapidly. We're right now seeing that Africa is actually dependent a lot on what the Western world says, and Africa are doing its own trials at the moment. And we hope that will change in the future. So what are the conundrums with the EUA in terms of safety and efficacy data? With the EUA, there could be no fewer safety and efficacy data than a full biological license application approval. So that's what is utopia. You want to have that at all times, but as I said to you, we were in a state of a public health emergency. This may result in less trust in the vaccine because the administration could be considered ongoing medical research. Now, let me just put this very clearly to you. When you have a trial going on and the trials are not completed and you want to stop it, the ethicists can say to you that, why are you doing this? Why are you stopping this? Why are you using this? Because this is still part of an ongoing medical research. And the only counter argument, if you bring back some of the points that Jerome Singh introduced when he spoke about the use of the vaccines for Ebola long before it went into stage 3. So under EUA, the vaccine recipients must be informed of the option to accept or refuse administration of the product based on the fact that until you get the biological license application, this product is under trial. But the countervailing argument is when it is allowed as an EUA, the FDA takes it up to a point in which very little is left to be done and safety and efficacy is well established. So the concern with deployment of EUA may result in another ethical dilemma, may result in compromising the ongoing clinical trials that seek to show conclusively how well the vaccine works. And I'll tell you why the statement is being made. And it's because of this. The trial participants are typically blinded to whether they receive the vaccine or the placebo. But once a vaccine has been shown to work, it's come to a very high level in the clinical trials in the third level, it becomes harder to ask participants to remain on the placebo arm, unprotected. Meaning, if you've got people that are sitting in a current trial, some getting the vaccine, some getting a placebo, and suddenly that vaccine is allowed EUA, is it ethically right to continue that trial and allow some of the recipients to continue to get the placebo? The problem, we know they're blinded, but the problem is, should the trial stop and allow everybody the right to say we all should be getting the vaccine? This is where the ethical conundrum has been used by a lot of the anti-vaccine groups. Then we get the ethical issues with crossover. If too many people cross over, that means leave the placebo group after they were told they were in it, the trials may not have sufficiently large control groups to gather statistically significant results for the long-term goals. So we know that these trials will be going on for a long, long time, looking at long-term endpoints. But if we stop these trials, we will not have a cohort of people that will continue to determine what the long-term goals are. So that's another ethical dilemma that one has to look at when you want to stop this, when you want to use an EUA. There is a need to ride out long-term safety and efficacy issues. If we don't do that, we won't know what will happen with the vaccine in 4 or 5 years' time from now. So we need to establish whether a vaccine prevents getting infected with the SARS-CoV-2, or whether it simply prevents infected people from getting a disease. That's the dilemma we're doing now, and that's what the Sazonka trial is, and a number of the other trials in the world, to say what percentage of the vaccine is preventing infection and what percentage of the vaccine is preventing long-term disease states, hospitalization, and death. So we're going to find a way in which these trials will continue to evaluate that. The major problem with the EUA is the number of people on the trials will drop out and get vaccinated under EUA. So we need to think out of the box, and I don't know the answers to this, how to retain people on trial until the biological license application is approved. So we sit in a conundrum that we're not going to have, for a long, long time in future, we're not going to have people to be sitting in the trial on the placebo arm and us having a conclusive kind of scientific information to say, this is what the vaccine can do, and this is what the unvaccinated will get to. So these are serious ethical concerns that are brought up. The last issue that I want to talk about is vaccine mandates. If you assess the legality of mandates for vaccines authorized under EUA, we have a problem. South Africa, we're looking at vaccine mandates. America is looking at vaccine mandates, and so are lots of parts of the world. But the question is, are mandates legal? So a discussion on vaccine mandates are plentiful, including the potential for state-issued orders and private directives from employees. State-issued orders means if you have a country like South Africa, let's say, and we have an independent state called KZN, an independent Western Cape. If the Western Cape decides it's going to take a directive of its own, it's probably going to be legal for it to face its own challenges compared to South Africa making a decision for all the provinces. So it varies. And we found out in the United States that half a dozen states have already decided that they're going to be implementing mandates and they will face the consequence as it comes. But what remains unclear is it legal for us to have mandates in place for any vaccine that's a EUA vaccine? Maybe not for the Pfizer now, but all other vaccines are still EUA. So should people be allowed to effect mandates when it's still under EUA? The issue of whether EUA vaccine mandates are permissible is particularly urgent, given the woefully poor COVID-19 immunization rollout. So in America, with 20% of people still not wanting to vaccinate, we notice that they are already starting to introduce vaccine mandates to 80,000 people. But as I said, we have a legal tussle ahead of us. Should vaccine uptake continue to lag? Mandatory COVID-19 vaccines may be viewed as necessary component of a public health response to a public pandemic. Are mandates legally permitted for vaccines only granted by EUA by the FDA? I mean, that is so no courts have interpreted the provision of mandates. It would appear that the mandates are categorically prohibited, since each person must have an option to accept or refuse the administration of product. It's a human right. The issue is, can refusal come with a consequence? There's no interpretation of what this principle of consequence is. Will it mean that, can they say that if you don't take the vaccine, an employer, that we're going to terminate your employment? We're not sure. Can they say with a mandate that, for example, we're seeing it, you can't come into a shopping center? So I think these issues are going to be tested one at a time. And as I said, we're not sure what the consequence is, and we're not sure how we're going to interpret it. But what we do know is that we have globally, I think, called the Disaster Management Act. In South Africa, we have it particularly, and under the Disaster Management Act, this act can supersede other acts and may give the government and may give the office bearers and policymakers the right to introduce mandates for everybody to have the vaccine taken. So according to the CDC recommendations, COVID-19 vaccines are not mandated under EUA. However, they allow for local mandates, whether a state or local government or employer may require or mandate COVID-19 vaccination is a matter of state or the applicable law. So the law of the state may have an amendment to it or may have a clause into it in which it can say, we're going to implement it, but we still think the jury is out to find out what will happen if people insist on mandates and how will the courts interpret it. So in conclusion, the root of the dilemma behind vaccine mandates is a conflict between public health ethics and the right of individuals' liberty and autonomy. We have a thing called the utilitarian argument for vaccine mandates, claim that the higher immunization rates result in higher good for all, lives saved and mobility avoided. So more people will benefit from the mandates. And according to this view, mandatory universal vaccination is morally justified because of the consequences. And I said, we know what the consequences can be: commonly protection, reduction in viral transmission, resulting in lower rates of infection, hospitalization, and death. And this is what the ethicists feel should be overruling the fact that the law will be against a mandate. And too much of controversy and legality issues around EUA for COVID-19 vaccines may help society overcome the wrath of the pandemic, mandates for which such vaccines are unlikely to pass legal muster. So I'm not sure if it won't pass legal muster, but what it looks like, if we continue to have up to 20% of people not taking a vaccine, we're going to find that we're going to be applying the Disaster Management Act to put in place mandates even in this country. So I'm going to leave you at that level. It's quite a mouthful, but I think these are important issues that we need as practitioners to understand if we want to become good advocates for our patients and the communities that we serve, for them to change from being almost what we're saying, vaccine reluctant, to become vaccine acceptors. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Thank you for taking the time to prepare the comprehensive presentation. And I think you've tabled all the facts quite nicely and diligently there as well. We've got some questions. Is there in South Africa liability immunity for activities related to medical countermeasures against COVID-19, like EAU of COVID vaccines?
Just say that again. It's a bit long.
I'll just go through that question. Sorry, it's a long one. Yeah. Is there in South Africa liability immunity for activities related to medical countermeasures against COVID-19, like EAU of COVID vaccines? So I think what he's trying to ask is there any countermeasures that patients have against maybe the state for taking the vaccines, if there's any adverse events or things like that?
No, definitely not. What has happened is all vaccine manufacturers, before they signed a sales agreement with the South African government, and they put in a no-claim indemnity clause in it, in the sense that if something goes wrong with an individual because of the individual's peculiarity, they're not responsible. So they have definitely written that, and they refuse to have any sales agreement with the country until that document. So we definitely don't have it.
Okay.
Well, I must say that we all found that quite, we questioned the Department of Health, and they felt that the manufacturers have done it not in South Africa, but this is an international thing, that they can't be responsible for any untoward side effect. Okay.
In your view, what's the biggest barrier that we are facing now? Is it anti-vaxxers? Is it funding, resistance to vaccinate? What would you feel is the biggest barrier we are facing now?
I think the biggest barrier we're facing now is, I would say, vaccine inertia. Now, I think we must be very clear. Anti-vaxxers are a small group. We know that if they don't want to take it, you're actually not going to spend a lot of time convincing them to take it. But we're sitting with a group of vaccine hesitant people, where all these information in the media, they want to take the vaccine, but they've got this inertia. They're waiting maybe to see a relative take it or some friends take it. And they're hesitant to take it, but they will take it. They need convincing. Also, there is the element of vaccine literacy. People are not sure what the vaccine does. And I don't think we're spending enough time telling them how vaccines work. If you ask the very same people, do you send your children for vaccines from mumps, measles, chickenpox, rubella? And they say, yes. Why did you do that? Because the school requires it. But do you know how it works? No, we don't. So we're sitting in a period between two extremes. We're sitting in a period in which people don't want it. We're sitting in another period where it's going to take a long time to get the people to understand. But at the moment, we have vaccine inertia. And that's why I said I'll spend a little bit more time saying that you and I, as we sit here, can decrease this inertia and make people change their mind. There was a pharmacy in Western Cape early this week, or late last week, where 64 people pitched to the pharmacy all at once, maybe all friends. 30 took the vaccine and 34 didn't want the vaccine. The pharmacist on his own took them into a little meeting, chatted with them, told him what the vaccine does, how it works, the safety of the vaccine, how it will benefit not only him, but his family. Would you believe it? The 34 decided that they will take the vaccine. The other part of the question is, yeah, maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we had an issue in terms of the number of doses. We now have excess doses. We have excess doses of the Pfizer vaccine. For some unknown reason, we've opened up to the 18-year-olds, and the 18-year-olds are not rolling up their sleeves to want to take the vaccine. And to me, it's a little bit disappointing because we have enough vaccines. We have to move into this area of getting these people to understand the benefit of the vaccine and to take the vaccine. Therefore, you'll see on every Friday morning, and as often as possible, the Minister of Health and high-ranking officials going to the media trying to convince them. So certainly we have the vaccines. We just have to mobilize the people to go and take the vaccines now. There is another issue as well. You know, we're coming to a decision that with the sub-districts and rural areas, we're going to find a way to take the vaccine to the people. We can't expect those people to come for the vaccines. And we have a shortage of J&J vaccines right now. That number will increase in end of September. And then the idea is to keep the Pfizer more for the metros because it's a 2-dose vaccine, and take the J&J into the semi-rural areas because it's a single-dose vaccine. So if people don't have access to it and we go to them, it's just to go there once to give them the vaccine.
Okay, thanks. You know, as you mentioned, there's just a minority of maybe colleagues as well, you know, who are anti-vax. What can we do to counter these unsubstantiated claims? You know, can these colleagues be reported, or what's the channels to follow?
You know, let's start first with everybody's got a democratic right to their opinion. I think if you've got a right to your opinion, it's your opinion. But I think if it's an opinion that's going to affect the safety of other people, you shouldn't go into the media with it. That's my view. Other people have their own views. But according to the Disaster Management Act in South Africa, if you say something or convince people otherwise about taking a vaccine, you are liable to prosecution, you are liable to imprisonment, you're liable to a huge fine. And you are liable, if you're a healthcare professional, to appear before the health professional, the HPCSA. Unfortunately, it's written in the Disaster Management Act. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate that we have these people that are doing this, but it's really, I really feel sorry for the people that they are able to convince to do otherwise.
Okay. Do you think an open debate with anti-vaxxers will help? Maybe if we get some media coverage, so you know their views and our views backed up with evidence-based medicine and facts, it'll probably make a difference.
You know, I have a different view. Maybe others have a different view. I'm not in the view of that I should give anti-vaxxers media cover. I'm clear about this. They have a view of theirs, it's fine. But I'm not going to go and do a media. I've had a debate, 2 debates already with anti-vaxxers. I mean, a lot of what they're saying, it's their belief, it's not science. It's not science endorsed. But they're entitled to that belief because it is. And remember, under EUA, we can throw in a number of counter arguments about why are we doing this or the other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you listen to what Jerome says, we're sitting here with a public health emergency, right? If it's not you, it's your parent, or it's a friend's parent will die because they're not protected. That's one issue. The other science behind this is, look at the numbers that are coming out of Guruskia Hospital, where more than 90% of people that are being admitted and are severely ill are people that have not been vaccinated. The numbers that have been vaccinated that enter the hospital and leave are very few, right? They're very few, and I mean they're well and they leave. So we have evidence everywhere that those who are not vaccinated, right, tend to be the people that are being infected and can go on to long-term disease and mortality. So, I mean, that evidence is not being cooked up by any one of us. It's done by a hospital. So I think if we go to them, I would say another big argument is, why would 500,000, roughly 490,000 healthcare workers virtually voluntarily go and take the vaccine? And why did 7,000 health professionals take the vaccine? If the vaccine had no benefit. So yeah, going into an open debate is giving them a platform to confuse the population. I'm not inclined to do that. If others want to, it's fine. I think I've got one function in life, and that is to convince the person who can't make up his mind what I think is to the best for that person, and that person should still be given the right to make up his democratic decision whether he takes it or not.
Thanks. Good points, Prof. And there's another comment. I think a good point of vaccination would be the SASA grant payout points. It's always busy every month there. One of the other questions in the chat, apparently the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not accepted for international travel. Can you just comment on this?
Yeah, that was a media hype. It's not anymore. You'll see all the countries, especially the Middle East, there was a lot of story. Now there's official documents come out from the Middle East that if you have had your Johnson & Johnson, it's accepted, right? And the only issue that, I don't have an answer to it, but the only issue is that we're hoping that we get like an international kind of passport or international recognition to the vaccines. But now all countries accept all vaccines if the vaccine has been endorsed by the FDA and the WHO.
Okay, thanks. And just another question. They've had the J&J vaccine in Feb. Should they be taking another dose? And looking at the stats on antibody efficacy. So I think whether they should take a Pfizer or a repeated J&J dose as a booster.
That's the sexiest question you asked this evening. Let me tell you something. Look at work's being done at the moment. Lots of work's being done. Glenda Gray is doing a lot of work on it. What they're finding is at 8 months, there's still a high antibody titer that's available. And right now, they are not recommending it. But this is the argument in place. We have an excess of Pfizer vaccines. Or let me say it first the way I should say it. It is recommended that if you take an mRNA vaccine initially, and at any stage in your life you're taking a booster, you should take a viral vaccine. You shouldn't be taking the same vaccine as a booster. Because you're taking the vaccine, the antibodies from a different part of the spike protein. So you're probably going to get a bigger titer. So having said that, if you had the J&J vaccine, ideally you should get the booster. If you're going to get a booster, it should be the Pfizer. We are arguing at the moment, based on what you just said now, we all started it in February. We're coming now where you're going to see drop. The drop is not significant, but it's there. We are saying now, if we have so much of Pfizer vaccines in the country, and we're not getting a response from the 18-year-olds and up, we are saying instead of the vaccines expiring, we think the people that got it initially in February should be afforded the Pfizer vaccine as a booster, right? So we initially had a lot of refusal by government based on this issue of equity, in the sense that we have millions of people in this country. We need 42 million to get herd immunity. We're only giving it to about 14 million. And therefore, if somebody starts getting 2 doses, an extra dose, you're depriving other people. But that argument now is a little bit flux because we find that we have the vaccines, people are taking it. So we are actually, in our committees, motivating that we should be affording that to healthcare professionals to start with, to take the Pfizer vaccine. I see in a chat last week or early this week, Prof. Mahdi was adamant that people should get the Pfizer vaccines as a booster. So if he says so, then I have to agree.
Okay. I think there's much more information to come for that there.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Prof. And it's a nice comment on the uphill battle with the anti-vaxxers as well. There's another question. but is a waning neutralizing antibodies a measure of vaccine efficacy?
Yeah, you know, the problem is what antibodies are we measuring? Because you see, the antibodies that we measure for the vaccine is a different antibody altogether from the vaccines, the antibody we're measuring for your natural infection, right? Also now there is a lot of concern about how many labs are really measuring the antibodies for the vaccine. And as Glenda Gray says, substantially very little or no. Then we have the issue that we need to talk around about, and the work is being done about, just not the antibodies that are coming in from mast cells, but also to what effect are we getting protected by the T cell? The T cell protection may be actually taking us longer into a protective mode than the normal antibodies that we measure after a COVID infection. So we have the antibodies for the COVID infection. We've got to assess very strongly the benefit of the T cell, and that the T cell discussion is becoming more and more an important discussion, which I think was important when we started about a year ago and suddenly waned, and now it's coming back into the fore. And then to say, when are we going to be able to measure the antibody titers efficaciously after the vaccine? So yeah, it's a bit of a dicey question, but as I said, I think follow the space on the T cell issue, because more and more of the vaccinologists and scientists are now concentrating on the benefit of T cell, which we allowed to slip.
Okay, great, thanks, thanks, Prophet. The other two questions have been answered as well. If there's any further questions, yeah, you can just post it in the chat box.
There's no question. I just want to end up by saying, you know, if one message I want to give out is, I think the strongest human being on the planet right now for vaccines is a healthcare professional. I think I want to leave a message that if every one of you guys can convince every day in your rooms 20 patients that come to your rooms to take it and make those 20 patients become the ambassadors into the community, we'll win this battle. I think I'm saying this over and over again. I don't think a film star, I don't think a soccer player or a rugby player is known to everybody living in Phoenix or in Chatsworth, right? Or in the middle of Kwamashu. Maybe a soccer star would. But people don't go for medical information or seek medical advice from film stars and from soccer players. They go to their doctor. So I would like you to spend a few minutes with your patient, and I think we'll make a huge difference. We are the film stars of today. We are the soccer players. We are the cricketers of today in our own rooms. So if we can leave this meeting with one thing, if every one of us can say, I'm going to take up this challenge to convince 10 other people every day, to convince 10, 10 will convince 10, will convince 10, will convince 10. I think for no money spent, we will become the ambassadors of change. If that's the only message I can leave to you today.
Thanks, well said, Prof, and I agree with you totally. You know, we are the patient's first point of contact when it comes to healthcare, and you know, we should be the ones to be advising them, someone in their community, and not someone who's like you say, you know, a celebrity which they don't really interact with. So I agree with that. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Colleagues, thank you all for tuning into this evening's meeting. And once again, thanks to Glenmark and Dr. Berry, Prof. Chetty, the entire KZNDHC team, their EXCO, and the staff as well for arranging this meeting. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Priti Lamnachan to do the closing. Priti, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Naren. Wonderful, great. Thanks, Prof. Thanks to Dr. Berry for the beautiful, scintillating talks, and thanks to Glenmark for the joining and partnering in running our webinars with us and taking the message over to all of us professionals. And really, this is a time for us to introspect and reflect on where we are in this whole process. And like you said, Prof, we need to start to get to our patients and get them going to spread the word about vaccination and how we mobilize our communities. But thanks to all of our colleagues who've attended. You guys are great. You guys are excellent. And we love you all for your endearing support. There are many other processes that need your support that we need for you to get involved in. So in the near future, watch this space. There's a whole lot of issues coming up. Thank you very much. And don't forget the forthcoming KZNDHC webinar, which will be our conference and meeting process. Thank you very much. Good night all. May you enjoy a blessed week ahead. Bye-bye now.